Hey BookTube, welcome back to my channel. I am here with one of my BookTube besties, Mark from Book Time with Elvis.
Hello, everyone.
And we're here to talk about The Wicked Boy, An Infamous Murder in Victorian London by Kate Summerscale. This was the read for the Black Hearts Book Club. And Mark really breezed through this book in like 2 days.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll start with that, Mark. What were your just general impressions of the book? If you give it a rating, what would you rate it?
Well, I found it eminently readable. It obviously, because I read through it quite quickly, and I'm not a fast reader, so that's saying something. As a rating, I believe I probably gave it 5 stars because I'm a very generous marker. I have to say, I really am. You have to be really terrible, and even then, I'll probably give you 3 stars rather than like 2 or 1. But I'm also a little bit like this at school as well, but don't tell anyone. I find it very difficult to give below a C, especially when people make the effort for things. But because of I also measure it against how much I enjoyed it and how interesting I found it, and it was to me fascinating. I love this kind of thing. It's true crime. It's historical, so it's kind of like all these things that I enjoy. Hi, Mum. Sorry, she just popped in. Hi, Sean, as well. Hi, Cool Gamer. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, actually. Did you want me to speak about the book or just the rating I gave it?
If you want to go on, do go on.
Well, I found it interesting, probably more interesting because of the fact we'd read the 5. And of course, it's a fairly similar period. There's like a 10-year difference. It's set around 10 years or so later than the events of 1888 and Jack the Ripper in London. And again, we're seeing the familiar story. And I suppose as well, at the same time, I'm reading Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which also looks at poverty and this problem, maybe 50 years before the events in the book we read. And, it really hit home to me again how horrible it was to be poor in Victorian England. Although I would say this family seemed to be better off. They were like the lower middle or the upper lower class. Upper lower class, that was it. They weren't like on the breadline. They seemed to have, they had times where they had to pawn things to tide them over till their paydays and stuff. But it seemed like they were often able to redeem the goods they pawned. And I suppose given the nature of the father's job, who was in like the merchant navy, it might have been a difficult situation anyway with regards to money and having it at the right times because he's not there for quite a large part of the year. But yeah, I think that made it all the more interesting to me. Are you going to give an outline of it or?
Sure. So essentially what we have is a Victorian true crime story of 13-year-old Robert Combs, who is convicted of matricide. So he murders his mother. And I think one of the creepiest things for everyone who is reading this book is that he wanted to keep her in the house. And he, had the body upstairs and went on this 10-day kind of romp around London, really, going to pawn shops and getting some extra money and
going to cricket matches too.
Going to cricket matches and coffee houses and this sort of thing. So I think right off the bat, the creep factor is there because you're just waiting during that 10-day outline for the body to finally be discovered. And I think some of us were kind of on pins and needles thinking like, can't they smell it yet? So
well, I think it just shows how smelly Victorian England was that it masked it for a bit.
Yeah. See, that I think that was our assumption, was that it must be pretty
but
smelly.
you mentioned the creepiness factor about the fact he kept her body, but that didn't actually surprise me. I didn't really think about it in the same way until all of you started talking about it as something creepy. I looked at it as just somebody who's done, how like a child will do something wrong and then just try to hide it.
Yeah.
It's like they might draw on the wall and then maybe just move something in front of it. That's how I looked at it, as like, what's he gonna? I mean, he did have a plan.
Yes.
I think, to dispose of the body.
Yes. Now you got to be careful, Mark, because Pauline could come up with some stories now about some things you've done and you tried to hide when you were a child. we've got an ace in the hole here. We can get all.
There's a long list of them, and I don't even think she knows all of them yet. So I should be very careful. She might. Well, luckily they've moved house, so they won't discover even now some of the ones that I did. But so I think he wasn't averse to getting rid of the body. It's just like, what's he going to do? He's a 13-year-old child. Right. He can't lift a grown woman. We didn't mention the fact his younger brother is in on it with him, though.
Yes. So his younger brother, there's questions throughout the book on his involvement and whether, he was going to be charged. And the two boys do differ in their behavior around the event. I feel like we kind of all agreed that Robert's behavior was definitely more sociopathic. I mean, he seemed to have no remorse when, it was discovered. And even when they were questioned by adults as to the whereabouts of their mother, he seemed, to easily lie. And Natty kind of withdrew and was kind of quiet, and you could kind of tell that something was wrong. I think the part about keeping the body that really creeped me out is the fact that he kept going back into the room.
Yes, and I did wonder what he was doing in there.
Right. And I think, part of it was he was getting money and that sort of thing. But, now that I'm thinking back on it and some things that they've mentioned, you wonder if the first time or two she wasn't still alive, because the younger brother did say he heard like a groan, and the brother went back into the room. So yeah, I think that to me, I get what you're saying. Like, obviously, what is this child going to do with this body? Like, he can't do anything. But the fact that he kept going back in there and just...
Well, also, you mentioned the fact he's going in there to get money and stuff, but I'm sure they said somewhere that one of the mysteries of it was there was money, there was jewelry that he didn't touch.
Right.
He took some money from somewhere else, I think, but he didn't absolutely pillage and pilfer everything of value in his mother's room, because they said that was quite an odd thing. He resorted to pawning the watches or whatever, but there were still some valuables that he could have exploited, but he didn't. So it's very odd. Alexis, we're talking about The Wicked Boy by Kate Summerscale.
So in the beginning of the book, there is a prologue, and I don't want to get into spoilers, but what were your initial thoughts on the prologue? Did you think you had it figured out as to how the prologue was related? Because the prologue is in Australia.
Well, the prologue was a genius device because it sucks you in. It's a short piece, and it really did the job of pulling you in. And you do become curious enough to have to read through it to find out what the author's talking about. Obviously, I couldn't work out any link when he got his punishment. I thought he would probably have been there for the rest of his life. I mean, it's hard. It's going to be hard not to have spoilers, but to be honest, if anyone checks Wikipedia, it's all spoiled anyway, because I looked it up afterwards and it's all there. It is a true story, so it is quite hard to avoid spoilers with these things. But obviously, when he does emigrate, then it becomes clear that there's going to be some link, obviously, with him in Australia. What that link turns out to be was a complete surprise to me, though. I didn't expect that. To be honest, I thought it was probably going to be something along the lines of a reoffending or something like this. But it was a good twist. It was a good twist.
It was, and I agree with you. I thought it would be a sort of reoffending sort of thing. But I was kind of perplexed by that because The prologue is essentially a child who has been
horribly beaten.
Abused in some manner. We're not really sure the backstory of it. It's very mysterious. So you're right. It definitely draws us in. But I was a little taken aback because the crime that Robert commits, killing his mother, is very specific. That's very specific. So I was kind of like, the only way I can see this work is if he reoffends, but it doesn't match up to me. Like serial killers like typically have a pattern, and with killing the mother, that's just very specific. I don't know.
Well, I started thinking it might be like a case of history repeating itself, or there was some familial link, like perhaps it was Robert's son who had killed his mother or killed him, or you know what I mean?
That would have made sense.
The child to have been guilty, because I don't think in the prologue she hints too much at the fact that the child has been abused, just the condition of the child, which could also result in the child having done something violent. So, being covered with blood doesn't mean that, the child's the victim. It could be the perpetrator, right? So, yeah, it was... oh my God. You have to put up Alan's comment.
Oh my goodness. What do we have here? Wow.
Yeah. Well, there you go, Alan.
Alan, wow. That one left me speechless, man.
Okay. Not the normal kind of comment you expect to get, is it? But,
It's not.
And it was his mother.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay, this is more common, I guess, than we thought.
I just really
So, well, and that's something else. It's like I think because this sort of crime, a child killing a parent or a parent killing a child, it's so unnatural. It really goes against kind of the innate link there, I think, that most families seem to have. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this case was so interesting to me, because of that. But yeah, obviously I guess it does happen. But
Did you at any point feel that maybe it wasn't him that killed her, that it may have been his brother?
No.
Never.
Did you think that?
I did think maybe early on, I thought maybe Robert, being the older brother, was protecting his younger brother.
Interesting. Okay. Well, you know why I did not think that. Robert, with the smiling and the laughing after he was arrested and sleeping in his mother's bed, I don't know. There were just too many red flags with Robert. And Natty, he displayed behavior that I felt was more relatable in that circumstance. Like, I feel like,
run away.
Yeah, as a child, he's running away. He's shrinking away from adults. He's not answering questions about the mother. He seems, conflicted about what's happened. Yeah, I don't. And you might be right, because there was that whole episode in the book about Natty being beaten by his mother for taking some food the night before she was murdered. And, Robert talked about that kind of being the impetus for this whole thing. And so you could be right.
Well, I think either way, Robert was very protective of his brother, because he either protected his brother who had done the deed, or he did the deed to protect his brother, which is kind of really what it seems like he did. Although, this is the hardest thing with the book, is that we, of course, will never know. And I think Catherine said something about maybe it raises more questions than it answers, in terms of, how responsible the mother may have been for her own demise, if that makes sense. Because, what was she like to the children? What impression did you get of the mother from, all the things we heard about her from other people and things like that?
So it's interesting because I feel like the author really kept a few key details secret from us until the very end. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like, there were kind of hints that maybe something was amiss there. I think the first hint for me was the fact that this 13-year-old child, every time the dad was away, he was in the marital bed, which I'm not saying that there was anything going on there, but it just seems kind of odd. It would have seemed less odd to me if both kids were in the bed, like if they missed their dad, or maybe if it was the youngest kid.
Mm-hmm.
But, the author comments that it wasn't unusual for children to sleep with their parents if it was a space situation. So if
And
it
it
was a
wasn't.
lack of space, and it wasn't. So to me, that was number one, kind of odd. And, by all accounts, she was very doting on her children. She kind of let them get away with a lot, according to a lot of people. And, I could definitely see that maybe contributing to this event, because if Robert did not get his way and he was used to getting his way, maybe that set him off. That was what I was thinking initially. But at the very end of the book, so I guess this is kind of spoilers, guys, so if you don't want to hear it. But at the very end of the book, there's mention of, I want to say, the mom threatening the children with knives. So she threw
Mm-hmm.
knives and threatened
Mm-hmm.
death.
Mm-hmm.
And, they had both children had run away a couple times. And that was a red flag to me too, because, it's not necessarily indicative that there's abuse, but it does tell us that something is going on in that house. Either the parents have no control, or the child has some sort of issue going on, or maybe there is abuse. So something is happening there.
Well, I think if it was a question of the child really having free reign and being able to do what they want, they wouldn't really have much need or feeling to run away. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm sure, he was a very bright boy, Robert. I mean, they both were actually, even though Natty comes across a bit maybe slower, but they do take pains to point out both of them were, well above average and quite studious when they actually went to school, and quite clever, and had reached a high level of attainment within the education that was available to them. And I think they would know that their situation would not be better off by running away, even though that also links into the fact of the whole fantasy world that he's living in,
Yeah.
due to the books he's reading and the fact that he wants to move away for adventure and things like that. But I don't know. Yeah,
It could
it's
be it
very
could be manipulation. Maybe when I run away, every time I come back home, my mom is so grateful that I'm back home that I get to do whatever
true.
I want.
True.
But, I think you're right. Obviously, his situation, if he wants to get what he desires, he's not going to get it by running away necessarily if he stays away, if he stays gone.
Mm.
So I think another red flag, for me, and we had a whole discussion about this in the Instagram chat, but Robert suffered from migraines, and he was on some medication for this, and they don't really go into a lot of the details about the medication, but it's essentially a medication for people who have epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know from experience that those medications are extremely powerful and they can have very negative side effects, and we're talking about a child here. So I had all of these questions, and I'm not a scientist, obviously, but I had all these questions about this child's brain, because we have this child's brain. It's not fully formed yet. He's suffering from these migraines. He's on this really powerful medication. And
bear in mind, he has suffered head trauma as well from birth.
that is true. I forgot all about that. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously we weren't saying in the group that everyone who suffers from migraines is going to be a violent maniac, because that would be pretty much the entire group, because a lot of people in the group, we suffer from migraines. So we're like, okay, this is not a good sign. Even though, I did find some research, the National Institute of Health, they did find a link between some people who suffer from migraines and their propensity for violence. And so there could be something to that. And I think with any murderer, I am always curious about their brain, because I do think that there is something different. There is something that is wired differently.
I wonder, if there's any link between head trauma at birth and the prepubescent migraines and things like that people have, because I'm sure, to remind my mum, I don't think I was a particularly easy birth. I know she herself was a premature birth, both of whom suffered terribly mostly before our teenage years with migraines. But, they do come on every now and again in adulthood, but nowhere near the frequency as before. And I wonder about the others in the group, whether they know if they would have had any particular issues, that could have caused that in them, or whether it's just a genetic thing and it doesn't make any difference. So why are you smiling there?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about my mom had this really sweet friend, and she's passed, God rest her soul, but she was the sweetest lady. And she was the first lady that my mom let babysit me when I was an infant. And it was just for a couple of hours. I think my mom attended like a wedding or something. And so she laid me on her bed. She didn't have like a crib or anything. So she laid me on her bed and she had pillows around me. Well, even to this day, I roll constantly in my sleep. I'm a mover. I'm like always moving around. So I rolled off the bed and fell on my head, and she was just tore all to pieces as she was, frantic, because, she couldn't even fathom telling my mom this. But I was fine. Everything was fine. I suppose I was fine. I don't know. I'll let you guys.
Exactly, you suppose, but then you suffer from.
But I suffer from migraines. So yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Dr. Mark over here, you see.
I'm not a doctor. Just play one on YouTube.
That's it. You've given me a new live idea, weekly surgery,
Oh my gosh. Oh gosh, this will be great. I can't wait.
I can just Google the symptoms, Oh yeah, you're suffering from, disclaimer, yeah.
Dr. Google.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah,
but you're right. I think his actions definitely were not normal.
Yeah.
After the death of his mother, and when he was found out about it, and almost the whole fame-seeking part of him. He was obsessed with that other killer, wasn't he? I forget the name. Dean, was it? Somebody Dean?
I think so.
And he, how smartly dressed. He really took his court case and everything like a big show, didn't he? Really, and he wanted the death penalty. All this weird stuff, which was all, it was all very strange. So, but
this book is just revealing so much about our little book club here, because most of us have migraines, and then this killer here, he's kind of fascinated by other murderers, and here we are again. What does that say? I guess.
Well, I noticed. Isn't one of your picks for next year? This year, was it you or was it somebody else?
Lady Killers.
No, Strangers on a Train. Is that one of them?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this is why you brought us all together, isn't it, Carrie? The whole crisscross. It's going to be the only link. We all live in different countries, different states, yet somehow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, but what's interesting, I don't know. He was really obsessed with that murderer and the whole story behind that. But I don't know that that's super odd, because we have to think back to Victorian London, and that, just like now, and modern obsession with true crime, back then it was even more so, because it was kind of a live show. I mean, they could go out to the executions, they could go, see the site of the murder, all of that. So I don't know.
Look at Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors. I don't know if you know it. There's this Waxwork Museum in London, the original Chamber of Horrors, and Madame Tussauds made her name. She didn't just decide to become a waxwork figure. You know how she got into it?
How?
She started by taking the death masks of people beheaded in the French Revolution. So, this is, and of course, when it opens up, it's a huge sensation because people are fascinated by this stuff.
Yeah.
True crime is probably the biggest podcasting thing on, going, isn't it? True crime TV shows. I know a certain somebody who will remain nameless, but they may or may not be in this chat, who's absolutely loves true crime. Watches it all the time. In fact, the other day was moaning that she's running out of, he or she are running out of true crime things to watch. But the way the world is, we don't have to wait very long, because unfortunately people keep killing each other. So there's, more and more programs coming. So
yeah. And that
I
that
wanted to
is
mention, actually, sorry to keep butting in, but I wanted to mention the thing that I found really interesting, because it's just something that seems to always come back around again, is the whole nasty pop culture and its influence on our children. So then they're complaining about the Penny Dreadfuls and these things. And when I was a kid, it's coming up to 30 years ago, I think, because it was in the papers. There was a terrible murder of this young boy called James Bulger. He was, I think, 2 years old. And he was murdered by two boys aged 11 and 12. And they tortured him, and it was horrible. And it upset the whole country. And these boys were arrested, and they were put on trial, and they served their prison sentences. They're out now in the world. They've changed their identities and, obviously all this kind of stuff. But at the time, it was the so-called video nasties. The VHS cassettes that people rented from video stores, or the pirated ones. And it was things like Child's Play. That was it. The film Child's Play, Chucky. I think this was out, and they tried to link it with something like this, and they were trying to get all this legislation just exactly the same as what they're talking about with these books. They're then talking about with these horror films, and then, of course, in more recent times, they now talk about video games and all this kind of stuff. So it's very interesting.
Well, what do you think the role of the Penny Dreadfuls played in this case, if any role at all? Because, the judge didn't really seem to put a lot of stock into it. But there, of course, the media and others, really tried to make this link between, the stories of the Penny Dreadfuls in this case. So what are your thoughts about that? Then and now.
Right. Well, my thoughts about the whole thing is, anything that's kind of that we can deem as being potentially sensitive is going to have a terrible effect on somebody predisposed to it affecting them. So it's not a majority of people; it's a minority of people, and and obviously this is still going on. It's going on in big things and small things. Today I made sorry to plug my own channel here, but a video about the fact that people have been changing, the publishers of Roald Dahl's books are changing the words and things he used so as not to upset, people today. And it just seems to me like, we talk in England about things like the nanny state, and I think there's that term as well, which is slightly different in meaning, but what do they call it? Mansplaining. Is it where men patronize women? And so, but it seems to me now that there's some force, and I don't want to sound like I won't say mad conspiracy theorist, because, they're not all mad, are they, Carrie? But, but there is kind of almost like a something splaining from some power on now the rest of the rest of the world, saying like, we're going to tell you how it is. And one of the things was, for example, in Roald Dahl's book The Witches, all the witches are bald, so they wear wigs. So now in the book The Witches, they have to explain that women wear wigs for a variety of different reasons, such as illness, not because they're witches. And I'm thinking, why on earth do the children need to be told this? Because one, Roald Dahl isn't read by like really tiny kids. It's read by 10-year-olds, maybe 8 to 10-year-old kids that know or should know, without it actually having to be, spoon-fed to them. I read it, and never did I think that if a woman unfortunately was bald or wore a wig, that she was automatically a witch. I might, kids are going to look anyway. Like if you see a bald woman, unfortunately, whatever the reason is, it is unfortunately one of those things that's going to cause a child to look and point, maybe, and their mum's, slapping them and saying, don't point, don't look out, that kind of thing, whatever. So it just seems that this has always been the case, or at least, from this book to now, and it's just in all sorts of different ways being, it's probably got worse actually, because at least the judge in that case is like, load of rubbish,
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's right. He's right, because of course those books were read by hundreds of thousands of children, and a fraction could be linked to some kind of psychotic fantasy psychotic behavior. So anyway, I'm done.
I agree. And I think what you're talking about there, Mark, is I think it goes back to money. I think there's an entire industry now that is based on the idea of being outraged at fill in the blank. Okay. And we will find it, whatever it is. Okay. So I think with, the Dahl books, it's what can we find here? what can we find? We're looking for something.
I think it was Brian from Bookish actually who commented on it and said, and I had thought of it, and I thought he was right, that the sad thing is Roald Dahl has probably fallen out of fashion anyway, and a lot of kids don't read as much anymore, and if they do, they're not interested in those types of stories maybe. And I think they're looking at it as a desperate effort to somehow repackage and put him back out into the world. But I just, but the problem is when you change, I mean, I can understand in the case of someone like Enid Blyton, where she uses, racial epithets that are not, or never were appropriate, but are especially not appropriate now, that particular word can be removed. But when you actively change verses of a poem, or you pull out a paragraph and rewrite it, and then you package that up as Roald Dahl's work, it isn't anymore.
Right.
You're trying to cash in on the name. The work isn't his. And one of the, I don't want to make it all about this, but there is that kind of link. But it was like, he specifically wrote that Oompa Loompas were little men or small men. I can't remember exactly the phrase. But to make it more inclusive now, of course, they are now little people. Yeah. Where do you stop with these kind of things? And at least this judge, although he was, what's a word I can use that's PG-13, a muppet, this judge, he really was, but he was kind of corrupt. I mean, especially later on when she does the little postscript about some of the other what do they call it? Dramatis person, the cast of characters in this book, where the guy is basically, I don't know, the solicitor, the lawyer was pretty much I don't know if he was a pedophile, but he was a sex pest, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he comes up before that judge and he just dismisses it, even though he's plainly guilty. But at least, in this respect, he does pretty well. Actually, does he though? Because I'm trying to think. The problem with that judge, he does seem to kind of change his opinions on things a lot through in this book, doesn't he? Depending on because he picks up on, like, one person said, I can't remember what it was. One person suggested something to him and he kind of just ignores it. And then another person should suggest the same thing to him, and he picks it up and he runs with it. And it's like, very strange.
Yeah. I have to.
Yeah, I thought you might have
pop
to.
I'm actually from Virginia, and yeah, I do have quite an accent. It's funny, when I first started BookTube, Alexis, there were quite a few other booktubers who thought I was from Texas. I don't know. I must have, I do have a bit of a fascination with the Kennedy assassination. So I'm not, I'm not from Texas, but I have a connection, I guess, to Texas. So I'll take it, I guess. I can't really do much about my accent, so at this point I just kind of have to embrace it. I have tried to work on it and clean it up a little bit, but Virginia is kind of weird.
I like it.
Well, I like your accent, Mark. I wish I had. If we could swap.
Well, I did manufacture mine, so
Well, Virginia is kind of weird because I'm in the southern part of Virginia, and people from this area speak way, way different than people from Northern Virginia or the coast. So it's kind of interesting. Virginia's kind of a unique state in that respect, pretty diverse. But
how far are you from like Washington DC then?
Oh gosh, probably 4 or 5 hours.
Oh, okay, so it's quite a way away.
Yeah, I'm closer. I'm not very far from North Carolina, so.
Carolina, I like that.
So, well, thank you guys. I appreciate the support with the accent, because it is something that I have kind of struggled with at certain points in my life, because I have most of the jobs that I've had require a lot of speaking. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's videos on what's the mountains there?
The Appalachian Mountains.
Wasn't there an Appalachian? Is it Appalachian or Appalachian? I always thought it was Appalachian.
If you're from Appalachia, that's how you would say it. You would say Appalachia.
Appalachia, yeah, I can see that now.
Yeah, but most people do say Appalachian, Mount Appalachian. It sounds a little more, I guess.
But they did have their own. They did have their own dialect, didn't they? I've seen it on YouTube, and it's very, very difficult to understand.
Yeah, and there's a couple of islands. I'm thinking of Tangier Island specifically in Virginia, that they have a whole language almost. That's I think there's some relation to like Old English or something. Like it's something really, really kind of antiquated, but it's still around. So language is kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. I had a friend, and he was from Ireland, and I'm still friends with his wife.
I'm gonna set Alan off in a minute.
One of my friends, but she introduced me to her husband, and her husband, lovely man, very, very lovely, sweet man. And, of course, we meet, we, talk a little bit, and we leave the meeting, and I go back and I call my girlfriend, and I'm like, your husband is so nice, but I didn't understand a word he said. And she said, funny enough, he said the exact same thing about you. So it got better. We could understand each other a little bit, but he always called me that wee girl. But so I guess we need to get back to the Wicked Boy.
Well, yes. And what about the verdict? How did you think that was going to go?
I did not think that they were going to execute him. I did not think that would happen. Did you?
I didn't expect it, because I knew it was or wouldn't have been allowed, probably. What I expected was probably a death sentence to be handed down, but with the understanding it would be commuted. If that makes so, like a suspended death sentence, something like that, maybe. Because he was by all accounts a hanging judge, wasn't he? I think, and he seemed like he was pushing for the jury to do that because he sent them away, didn't he? They came out and saying, well, yes, he's guilty, but with this proviso. And he's like, no, he's either insane or he's guilty. And he sends them back, so it's like, But no, I wouldn't have expected them to have hanged him in 1890. But, 50 years before, it wouldn't have surprised me.
Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like so much was made about their age and the fact that initially they wanted to charge Natty, and then they said, well, no, he's gonna be a witness for us. When they started to kind of waffle on that, I was like, they're not gonna execute this kid. Like, there's no way they're gonna do that.
I did think John Fox might have been a victim of that, though.
Well, and we haven't talked much about him. What did you think about that whole scenario? Because essentially these two boys, they run off and they find this family friend named John Fox, and they tell him, look, mom's away and she wants you to look after us. So come on back to the house. Oh, and by the way, here's dad's suit. You can just have this. And we've got a few items we want to pawn at some pawn shop. So help us with that. But he comes and he stays with them. What did you think about him? And, did you think he knew anything or was involved?
Well, I think the sad thing about the world we live in now is that often when you have any kind of relationship between an adult male and young boys, your head goes somewhere where it's dark and not very nice. And that's what I thought, that maybe he was some kind of dodgy person. And in fact, I think he really was just an unwitting participant in stuff that he had no idea about. I mean, the nice thing about it was that every single person who was brought on to give any evidence of his character or to talk about him were of the same opinion, that the man was an idiot, which I thought was really harsh, because of course he's sitting in the court case, and it's like every witness comes up and says, well, John, he means well, but he's very slow, or John, he's not right in the mind, or John, he's, you just think, the poor guy's sitting there and everybody's saying this about him. But yeah, I mean, he must have been in that, because he unquestioningly pretty much did everything that Robert manipulated him into doing. And to be fair, Robert didn't really manipulate him into doing anything illegal, though, either. Right. I mean, it's not like he got him to move the body or even go in that room and stuff. So
yeah, he basically just kind of babysat, played with him a little bit, and went to some coffee shops. Yeah. I mean, I think Katie and maybe some other people in the group picked up on it very quickly that, hey, I think this guy's a little, simple. Like, I think like something is going on here. I don't think he is truly aware of what's happening. And, the author, bless you, the author does.
Sorry.
The author goes into kind of the idea that that this wasn't unusual because John Fox was around the family a lot. Like, apparently he would come to their house and chop wood and do things around the house, and he was kind of a fixture. I mean, he didn't live there, but there were periods of time where he stayed.
He did, and stayed for quite a while as well.
Yeah. So, initially, I think because we did not know that, in the first part of the book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is weird. Like, if I was an adult and two kids that I knew, and I knew their parents came to me and was like, oh, our parents are away, come look after us. Like, I would have a few more questions about this situation. And he didn't really question anything. But again, I think that knowing all the background, it makes a lot more sense. And I felt bad for the guy.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, he might not have been, and I don't know if he was, because he was lucky that his old master from his apprentice days sought him out and actually paid for his defense. And, that said a lot to me, that this guy hadn't seen him for years and actually, put his own reputation on the line to help him out. But I think he was, of course, he must have been a big victim of some kind of post-traumatic stress, or because what he had been through, John, was horrific. The whole accident on the sea with the fire on the ship and all this kind of stuff that he had, because he was terrified to ever go to sea again, wasn't he?
I forgot all about that.
Yeah, it was horrible. I had to kind of fast forward the bit with the cows and stuff. It was horrific.
I forgot all about that. Yeah, I'm glad you're on this live show, or this would have been a real bust, Mark. I forgot. But yeah, that's a good point. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, it must have had some impact on his behavior.
Yeah. Well, so Robert, it ends up at Broadmoor Lunatic Asylum. Well, I guess we should talk about your personal connection to this lunatic
my
asylum.
time in Broadmoor.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that, Mark.
Well, for those who don't know, Broadmoor is England's answer to, I don't know what it would be in America, but it's our most notorious prison for people with mental health issues. So all the most dangerous psychopaths and the Hannibal Lecters and whatnot find themselves in Broadmoor, and it just happened to be, just a few miles down from where I used to live. So it had an impact on our lives, although one that we didn't notice very often. So, for example, every Monday at 10 o'clock, I believe, at 10 o'clock, the alarm would sound, the test alarm for the Broadmoor inmates escaping. Yeah? So they played this alarm at 10 till 10:05, where they would do the all clear. I was going to say asylum for the criminally insane. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, lunatic asylum. But probably I can't say any of these words now, can I? I don't know what the correct term is.
The reason I used lunatic asylum is because that is what it was referred to at the time of the crime. So.
Well, what is it? What is it? Mental health prison? No.
I don't know you're the one that has the connection. You don't remember what it was called?
But I didn't. No. I know what it is. Sorry, I just don't know what the politically correct term is. Right?
Oh, okay.
Because we didn't refer it to anything
for the criminally insane. It's probably like Broadmoor prison for the criminally insane or something like that.
I think it's Broadmoor Hospital. Okay. I think it is just Broadmoor Hospital, but it's like, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Everybody in Britain
Alan said you're all okay. Just quit.
Everybody in Britain knows Broadmoor, right?
Yeah.
It houses the Yorkshire Ripper, or did, unless he died recently. I can't remember. It housed the Cray twins, or at least one of them, the more violent of the Cray brothers, and all our worst killers who were deemed mentally ill were there. So obviously, if any of them escaped, it would have been a big problem. And twice in my time there, which I think amounted to about 23 years, but twice, and actually fairly quick succession, I would say within a year or 2 years of the first one happening, the second one happened. And of course, it is an odd feeling because they... Sorry, I just saw Aaron's comment at the bottom there. There's another reason that he knows why I'm living.
You're on the land.
But I'm not lying low, am I? Really, I'm kind of out there, so it wouldn't be so good. But hide in plain sight, I suppose, is what they say. But it's quite an odd sound when the alarm sounds. It's quite an odd feeling when the alarm sounds on a time that isn't Monday at 10 o'clock. And the first time was fairly. I think it was. I'm trying to remember actually. I think the guy, it was a bit further away, but he had escaped. He was on visit to a normal hospital, and he climbed out the bathroom window or something, and he had escaped. The guards had let him go. I don't think he was super dangerous, but he was apprehended fairly quickly. The second one, he had been out doing some work in the grounds, and he scaled the wall. And this was more dangerous because when he was visiting the hospital, he was like a few towns over, whereas this time around, this person's in the vicinity. And I think he was a killer. But it was just very odd because we were at school and the alarm sounds and they called everybody together, and then they, have to go through the protocol of what happens when these inmates escape. And it was like we couldn't leave the school premises, and if we did, we had to leave in groups of 3 or something like that. And then, you know, there were suddenly police checkpoints on the road. There were vans everywhere. There was helicopters and helicopter searchlights through the night, and dog teams and stuff. And it was eerie. Yeah, it was eerie. But again, he was apprehended, I think, at least probably within 24 to 48 hours. And then I think it didn't happen anymore. But, you know, that alarm continued, you know, every Monday for obviously, I don't know for how long they've been doing it. I don't know if they did it at the time that Robert was there or not. Probably not, because, you know, they might have had some kind of alarm system. I don't know. But to be honest, and I think my mum mentions it actually there in the comments, and she's right, is, you know, considering it's Victorian England, she was surprised how well the inmates were treated. Exactly. To be honest,
yeah,
he was better off there than anywhere else, almost, where he was in that wing.
Yes.
It was like a summer camp almost, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah. I mean, basically, they had like a little gentleman's club there. They had, you know, billiards and the reading room and a pretty sweet library, it sounded like. I mean, and they had teams.
Yeah,
they
cricket. They had a cricket team, didn't they? The chess thing was fascinating, wasn't it?
The chess team, and with the chess team, they actually played some people through the mail, so they would, you know, mail each other moves, and they played some fairly prominent people. It was very interesting, and some of the pictures. I'm trying to see if I can find. Of course, you never can find what you're looking for, but there were some pictures of the gentleman. Yeah, this is the Broadmoor cricket team in 1905. Robert Combs may be the man sitting on the grass second from the left. But if you look at that picture, I mean, they all look well-dressed, well-groomed, pretty distinguished. They look like a fine group of gentlemen. I mean...
To be fair, though, like a lot of things in Victorian England, generally speaking, they were upper-class lunatics in that wing, though. Yeah. They weren't like... You know,
this
Robert
was section,
was put there because of his age, basically. And then
section 2, I think, is what it was called. That was the plush sector. Right. But I will say, I mean, to Pauline's point, I mean, even those in the other sectors, they allowed them, you know, exercise outside. They really valued that. They really seemed to treat the inmates very humanely, which, you know, I was really taken aback by this because I've always just heard the horror stories of these sorts of places. Even just, you know, mental hospitals that are not for people who have committed any crimes, just mental hospitals where the treatment is just, you know, borderline torturous, if not, you know, clearly abusive. So it really kind of took me aback, and it seemed to have worked with Robert. I mean, I don't want to, you know, say we have all the facts, because we don't, but this man went through World War I, and the extreme sort of violence that he was subjected to, you know, and the time that World War I soldiers spent at the front, you know, taking enemy fire, I think is unparalleled. I mean, they were in the trenches for countless days and exposed to the horrors of that. And it doesn't seem to have prompted any sort of criminal act or violence in Robert. I mean, it actually seemed to have the opposite effect.
Well, yeah, and it's almost the opposite, exactly the opposite effect. And considering that he wasn't even in a killing role,
right?
He was in the opposite kind of role. I mean, he was a medic.
He was a stretcher bearer,
So he wasn't, you know, armed. He was in the regimental band. You know, this is what I thought was wonderful, was how all of these things he learned at Broadmoor allowed him really to, you know, to live to live his life post-release, like because he learned tailoring, didn't he? How to sew things, and he learned all sorts of things. Yeah, it was really interesting. And and he came into I was actually curious because I read many years ago, I think it's Simon Winchester, I think, his book, The Surgeon of Crowthorne. I don't know if you've read that, Carrie, but that's about, the name escapes me, about the American surgeon that was in the wing with him, that they talk about, he caused upset amongst the other wealthy patients because he was given a suite of 2 rooms, because he had such an extensive book collection, because he was writing and doing work for the Oxford English Dictionary. Do you remember this bit? Yeah, I don't know, but he's mentioned a few times during Robert's time there, and this book is actually about him. So now I'm curious if Robert may have made an appearance, even though it's a long time before this came to light, in that book as well. And also, it's kind of made me want to revisit a bit more about about the experience of this guy in Broadmoor at the same time, because, as I said, I read it, but it's like 20 years ago. So,
well, with Robert, at the very end, I think we get a peek into what his home situation was like in the days leading up to the murder. Right before his father went away, there was apparently some big argument between the husband and wife, because the husband sort of suspected that the mother was having an affair and that some man was in his house when he wasn't there. And so there are references to this in letters that she writes. And I think one letter wasn't even sent. It was still left on her desk. So it sounds like, it was a chaotic sort of situation happening at home. We kind of suspect that there may have been some sort of abuse, particularly when the mother was left at home alone with the 2 kids. So, Broadmoor was probably the most stable place. I mean, it was very orderly. I mean, it seemed like he thrived with order, because even after World War I, when he's out of that, he sets himself up in this little lifestyle that he creates. He sets himself up in an almost, it's kind of an austere sort of lifestyle that he creates for himself, but it's very orderly.
Yes, it is. It is very orderly. And it's I don't know whether it's just because, but maybe that's why, again, the army kind of worked out for him as well, because he's living within the confines of Broadmoor, it seems quite relaxed, I suppose, but it's still going to have some element of regimented life. The army, of course, is going to have that, and it seems that he carried that on in his post, in his new life down under as well. So,
and I think that was why he was successful at not being, a reoffender. I think, the book does talk about the recidivism, that many of the inmates at Broadmoor, when they're released, they reoffend and they find themselves right back in the same position. But I think, as crazy as this sounds, I think the fact that he had that, entree into the military because of World War I think that was probably what saved him, because he went from one kind of orderly, lifestyle to another very orderly lifestyle where he still had that, camaraderie. He still had the band, he still had the cricket and all of that. And so I think that kind of set him up to be able to do this for himself.
And he does all those things you mentioned. He carries on. Yeah. Even when he's living in the middle of nowhere. Like, he is a member of, he teaches children music. He goes and plays music. He goes to watch the local cricket matches fairly regularly. Everybody in the neighborhood knew him.
Yeah.
And had nothing but good things to say about him. But it makes me wonder if, and I don't know if I'm being corrupted. It seems I can't make or be in any video these days without mentioning Les Miserables, but I don't know if you've read it, Carrie.
I have not.
You definitely should. But the main character in that, Jean Valjean, he's a convict, and he feels that he's done a lot of wrong in his life. So he denies himself. He feels guilty at any pleasure he gets from life, and he denies himself things. And I wonder if partly, that reading the two at the same time, I don't know if it's a spoiler or not to mention the boy.
I think we can go ahead. If people have hung around this long, then they're probably okay with us spoiling the prologue. So we are going to spoil that kind of tie-in. So if you want to keep that a mystery, go ahead and sign off now.
So there was a parallel to me, reading those two at the same time, because in the story of Les Miserables, which I guess might be a spoiler for you if you haven't read it, but I think everybody knows probably a little bit about
I'll forget it, I'm sure.
So this character ends up rescuing a child and bringing it up, which is exactly pretty much what Robert does. And the character who rescues this child and whatever, he dotes on the child, teaches her how to read and all this kind of stuff, which is basically, it's very similar. It was eerie reading the two together, I suppose. And, but this character denies himself pleasurable things. He lives an austere existence for himself. He lavishes the child with everything he can do, but, he'll sleep on the crappiest, nastiest bed, in a dank room. And there's an element of that with Robert, because he does, pretty much by the end, everything he's got left, he leaves to this person. He molds this young man into a fine citizen. He teaches him music, he teaches him how to sew, and also they do stuff together. They go off and and yet Robert isn't, he's living a life where he's doing just enough, but he's not done anything to really give himself, he doesn't marry, he's it's almost like perhaps he is punishing himself even after he's come out of prison, because I suppose, and to me, that also raised questions about whether or not he just did something. Well, I suppose it's a temporary insanity, but he obviously has the remorse, I think, to have this kind of self, what's the word? Not self, what's it called, Carrie?
Self-awareness?
Self-deprivation? Self-deprivation.
Yeah, self-deprivation.
As a kind of, oh my goodness, you see, I can't even speak English.
Kind of penance.
Penance, thank you, for this heinous act that he committed in his childhood.
Yeah, I mean, at the end with that prologue, I really had a whole new perspective on this boy. I mean, initially I was like, oh my gosh, this kid is a little psychopath. And I cannot believe that he is sitting there laughing and making faces. And he actually learned to play music when he was a child, because that was one thing that he did cry about, was the possibility of having to sell his instrument.
Was it banjo? No, it was.
I cannot remember.
Mandolin, or
I think it was a mandolin. Yeah, I think it was a mandolin. But he cried over that. So that was weird to me too. It's like, okay, you can cry over that, but you don't cry over this horrendous thing that you have done. So yeah, at the end, I just had a whole new perspective. And it made me really question everything, because the prologue ties into that boy, as you said, and the author actually seeks that man out, because on the tombstone, on Robert's tombstone, there's an epitaph there that basically says something to the effect of, with love and respect, basically, from this person, this man. And the big question is, did this boy know about Robert's past, or not? And the author never is able to answer that question, because the man is near death. And I think the family requested that she not bring up Robert's past, because it would be too upsetting, because he pretty much idolized this man. I mean, this man saved him from a very abusive home and took him in and treated him as a son. So Robert was very important to this whole family. And so they were really taken aback to learn that Robert as a child had murdered his mother. They had no clue, but we do wonder if the boy found out. And I think it was kind of cool how the author did end it. The last little bit, she says, I still couldn't be sure whether Harry knew about the murder. I hoped that he did and had loved Robert anyway. And that just kind of left me, I don't know. I just kind of sit there for a minute because
I tell you, you're on a
it's
run
hard
of
to
books,
say.
Books kind of choking you up a bit, Carrie.
I tell you, I've really had a run of disturbing books that get to me.
But I think that's the interesting thing there, though, is what was his motivation to help that boy? Because it's not normal that someone's just going to go in there, rescue a boy, and pretty much take on responsibility of, several years or whatever it turned out to be of raising him and looking after him. Yet we know that if he killed his mother, it may have been because she was abusive. So he can recognize that, he can empathize with that. And he killed his mother probably to protect his brother from abusive relationships. So what does he do again? He doesn't kill this person, the person who's abusing Harry, but he rescues the boy, basically.
Yeah.
Takes him in like he's done. So it shows that, it's a really horrible thing because he could be like a really nice, like a really good person, really, that he's going around rescuing people from horrific situations. But the fact is, we can't say with any confidence that this is exactly what happened on that day in 1895 when, his mother was killed. So it's hard, really.
And, I'm just throwing this out there because this is a Victorian crime. And we know that the, publicity around, things like Jack the Ripper murders, when we read the 5, we found out that some of those victims were not prostitutes, contrary to what the newspapers at the time reported and, what most people even still believe today. So a lot of the antics, maybe those courtroom antics that bothered me so and that convinced me that he was a little psychopath that was totally guilty and without remorse and without redemption, maybe those accounts were to titillate the public, that was just part of the show. I guess I'm, just kind of questioning that now because, you can do, and this author, I will say, I didn't read all of the notes, but I mean, this is where the notes section starts. So the notes in the bibliography is pretty extensive. I mean, it's a lot of research that's been done here, but I think we have to still consider that these are Victorian era sources and, what goes along with that. So, the frustration with a lot of people in the group, I get that because we will never know with any degree of certainty, exactly what happened.
Absolutely. But I think it helps if you go into books like this knowing that. I mean, 100 and whatever it is, 30-year-old, 40-year-old mystery, it's going to be very difficult to answer.
Yeah.
I don't know, did you read her other book? It was quite famous, wasn't it? The Suspicious of Mr. Witcher. It was quite a big seller.
Oh, yeah, okay. I have not. Did you read it?
No, I haven't, but I'm really tempted to now.
Well, maybe we should
after it because I do like true crime, but especially I like it, in this kind of era or these old ones. Yeah. Because I know it's open. It's open to so much interpretation, and that's fun because we get to take on a bit of detective ourselves. And I'm fine, in my conscience or whatever, going to bed at night believing Robert Toombs to have been completely and utterly, redeemed and what's the word? Jeez. Reformed? No, not rejuvenated. Oh my gosh, rehabilitated. There we go. I teach English for a living, folks. There you go.
Oh my gosh.
You live somewhere that's non-English speaking for so long, and even though you teach the subject, you don't, of course, use all the words you know, and sometimes there is a bit of delay, in calling them up from the depths of your mind. So even though rehabilitation is the same in Czech, but it has a slightly different meaning. So I don't know. But I think Alexis at the end, she asks a good question there. Can people change, or are they born evil? A question we are still arguing about. And I think that's true. And in the case of Robert, we don't know, but at least we can hope that is indeed what happened. Well, I think that's it. The evidence we have in front of us shows us that that's probably the case. Rather than any evidence to the contrary, which there isn't any. So, but it was great. It was an excellent choice. Well done.
Thank you.
Have you started on 2024's choices yet?
I know
You've got us booked up for the next 5 years, right?
Well, maybe I should start because I've gotten a few. Sean actually sent me one that looked really good. And then, of course, this author, it would be nice to see a bit more from her. So yeah, I could go ahead and start.
I have a couple on my list as well. So
we should share notes and work on this, Mark. Yeah.
Well, I still want to read book 2 of, but maybe if you want, we can do that. I don't know if everybody else wants to read that, but I want to read book 2 of the one from last month. So
yeah, that I don't know. I found myself reading a kind of a lighthearted bookshop romance, if that tells you anything, Mark. Because, all the stuff we've been reading, I feel like every little short I do, I'm like, okay, this is the most disturbing book I've ever read, So I feel like I needed a little fluff. So
I did feel terribly guilty though, because I was like, I felt I was honest. I said to you, this was.
You were very honest.
I did say I'm quite a sensitive person anyway, so I might be overreacting, but
well, I didn't
is one
cry.
of the grimmest reads ever.
I did not cry, but I did tell you I was thoroughly disturbed to the point where my sleep was kind of interrupted.
But it's just so dark. There's almost not like it's a soul-crushing read, really, I think. It's just so dark and depressing, but so good. I mean, you found yourself drawn in.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel, whether you might not feel it this early on that you want to read the second book. And I probably didn't at the time, but I have to say I really do now. I'm like, oh yeah, I understand it's not as bad, but
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, and to your point too about reading true crime, I'm with you. I do prefer to read true crime set, in another era, because I think that kind of it removes you a little bit from it. Even though we're really not that far removed from Victorian times, really, when you think about it, but you remove yourself a bit from it, so it's a little less. I don't want to say it's less disturbing, because it's always disturbing when you're talking about murder, but it's a little bit less disturbing, and you feel a little less, like a morbid looky-loo. It feels more of a history than kind of a weird fascination, because there was a lot of history in the book too.
Well, you're right in the sense that it's not that far removed, because I think she visits Australia in 2016, 2017, and that Harry is still alive at the age of 96. So she's meeting the man who was the boy that knew the man that was the child killer,
Yeah.
So it really isn't that far removed,
Not at all.
It's interesting. Basically, if she shook his hand, she shook a hand that touched the person that she's writing about. So
yeah, it's pretty wild.
It is wild. It is. I wonder. Someone asked the other day. I don't know, in one of my lives with Sean, about true crime, and if there was an example of like the oldest true crime work, and I do wonder what is one of the oldest true crime mysteries one can read about and stuff. Because I joked it was probably something like Cain and Abel, but
that would be pretty old. I think that would probably qualify. Yeah, I
but
don't know.
We know who did it. That's the boring thing.
Yeah, there's no mystery.
But there's only like 4 people on the earth. 2 of them weren't there.
It narrows it down. It does.
You don't need Poirot to work that one out, do you?
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to say about this read, Mark?
No, I'm good with it. I think most of us enjoyed it. It seemed that it was a smaller group this month, maybe. I don't know in terms of, but I've noticed that, and that's the wonderful thing about the club is like, you can just pop in and out of it and choose what takes your fancy, and that's really nice. And I would suggest to anybody watching to check out Carrie's video where she outlines what's coming up next. And if it's of interest to you, come and join. It's great fun. Give it a go. And you don't have to commit to like every single read. You just, choose what takes your fancy. So
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mark.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We will definitely do this again. I don't know.
It's just a shame that the next guest for your live is it's going to be such a letdown, really.
Well, you'll have to show up to heckle him.
I will do.
No,
only kidding, Sean.
I have high expectations for that because I know he has read that book so much. So I feel like he will carry the live show for me.
So no pressure then, Sean.
If I drop the ball. No pressure at all, Sean. No pressure at all. But thank you to everybody who tuned in. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.